Chapter 168. The two of them walked around the manor for a long time. Ning Chen looked at the familiar yet unfamiliar manor, his mind filled with many thoughts. Unknowingly, he had been in this world for a year. Too many things had happened in this year. They seemed to be right in front of him, but when he thought about it carefully, they seemed so far away. Great Xia went from its peak to its decline. Emperor Xia died, and the world attacked Great Xia. This thousand-year dynasty declined so quickly. In just a year, it had fallen to a precarious state. Great Xia being able to hold on for 1,000 years was already a miracle. In Chinese history, other than the distant Zhou dynasty, no other dynasty could last for more than 500 years, let alone 1,000 years. Great Xia's exhaustion had already shown signs. Just like the chaos of the 7 cities, he still didn't think that it was something that Prince Yu could do. However, this matter had happened a long time ago, and he didn't want to investigate it anymore. Many historical truths would eventually be buried in the darkness. Now that a new emperor had ascended the throne and the dust had settled, there was no point in investigating many things. Perhaps, Great Xia still had more internal problems that hadn't appeared, but it was no longer important. Great Xia's decline was coincidental, but it was also inevitable. However, Fan Lingyue's appearance brought this day forward by 10 years, 100 years, or even 1,000 years. Living in the same era as such a person was both fortunate and unfortunate. He didn't know whether Great Xia would fall or not, but he would try his best to stop it. As for the result, it wasn't something that he could decide. Fan Lingyue's greatest intelligence was that he was good at borrowing the power of the situation. There was a limit to a person's strength, and no matter how smart he was, he couldn't predict everything. However, as long as he grasped the situation and guided it, he could adjust the remaining details as needed. Great Xia's 1,000 years had buried too many hidden dangers. In this world, there weren't many people who would help others in need, but there were many who would kick them when they were down. Great Xia occupied the rich land of the Central Plains, and if possible, everyone wanted to take a bite out of it. Great Xia's strength was undeniable. Just Beimeng or Eternal Night Cult alone wouldn't be a match for Great Xia. However, if the two sides worked together, it was enough to go against the invincible Great Xia. As for the desolate city, Du Yi Temple, and the internal strife of Great Xia, they were all the result of Fan Lingyue's actions. Since the start of the war between the two dynasties, Great Xia had used up too much strength due to various internal and external reasons. Only when they officially fought with Beimeng did they realize that they did not have enough strength. Ning Chen was clear that Great Xia had lost their best chance, and every battle in the future would be even more difficult. Under the bright moon, the two of them walked back to the inner courtyard. Ning Chen looked around and took one last look at the familiar manor of the Marquis. He said softly, "It's getting late. I still have to visit someone. Let's go." Lu Ruoxi's eyes darkened as she let go of the wheelchair and silently stepped aside. Ning Chen didn't say anything else. He summoned the ghost palanquin and left. Looking at the ghost palanquin gradually disappearing into the distance, Lu Ruoxi mustered up her courage and shouted with all her strength, "Marquis, if you have time, come back to the mansion more often." The words he shouted echoed throughout the mansion. Unfortunately, the people who were far away could no longer hear him. Or perhaps they heard him, but they didn't reply. The most difficult thing to repay in the world was love, because it was not something that could be repaid with hard work. It was just like how some people spent their entire lives trying to love someone, while others tried their best to forget someone. The will of the heavens was always playing tricks on people, and it was rare for it to be fulfilled. No one knew where love came from, but it went deeper. Hard work couldn't get it, and it couldn't get rid of it. Lu Ruoxi turned around and returned to her room. She couldn't hold back her tears any longer, and they fell like rain. Ning Chen left decisively without any hesitation. His heart was like steel. In the Haolu manor, the ghost palanquin came and shook off all the guards. "Everyone, leave." Xia Zi walked out and said, "Yes." The guards retreated and made way for the two of them. Ning Chen got out of the palanquin and looked at the man in front of him. How have you been? How have you been? Xia Zi replied. I'm sorry for what happened before. Ning Chen said seriously. Xia Zi was silent for a moment before he said, You didn't do anything wrong. You don't need to apologize to me. The result of that night was already the best. Great Xia could not afford to have the risk of a second coup to force him to abdicate. Hearing this, Ning Chen sighed in his heart. He knew very well that if it weren't for his arrow, Great Xia might have had another Xiantian expert. It wasn't easy to enter the Xiantian realm. If he failed once, the next attempt would be even more difficult. He didn't expect that Xia Zi would risk his life to block that arrow for the third prince. He also didn't expect that Xia Zi would enter the Xiantian realm at that moment. Unfortunately, that arrow changed everything. The night was intoxicating, and the gentle wind carried a faint chill. When it blew on the body, it was slightly cold. Have you gone to see mother? Xia Zi asked. No. Ning Chen shook his head. If you have time, then go. Mother hasn't left Weiyang Palace since your accident. Xia Zi sighed. Ning Chen was silent and didn't reply. It wasn't that he didn't want to go, but that he didn't dare to. His eldest grandson was the person he respected the most in this world. Even when he got into big trouble in the past, he wasn't this afraid. At most, he would be scolded, but this time was different. How could he dare to go in his current state? Xia Zi saw Ning Chen's hesitation and said, I don't know what happened to you after that day, but since you're still alive, you should go and report your safety. Let's wait a little longer. Ning Chen smiled tiredly and declined. Things weren't as simple as he thought. If he didn't go, Zhang Sun would know that he was still alive. Although he was worried, he didn't need to be afraid. If he went, then the truth would be revealed. At that time, Zhang Sun wouldn't be able to accept it. Xia Zi didn't try to persuade him anymore. He walked into the room and soon came out with 2 jugs of wine. Here. Xia Zi threw a jug to him, then opened the lid and drank a mouthful. Ning Chen smiled and took off the black cloth covering his face. He also opened the lid and drank a mouthful. His face, which used to be delicate and pretty, had now been burned and corroded into a completely different appearance. Xia Zi glanced at him and didn't say anything. He continued to drink the wine. Wine was the best thing to drown one's sorrows. It had been intoxicating since ancient times. A few days ago, when Sinyu was helping Mother with her makeup, she noticed that a lot of Mother's hair had turned white. Unknowingly, Mother also started to grow old, Xia Zi said as he drank. Ning Chen was silent. He drank the wine one mouthful at a time. He didn't feel anything. It was as if he was drinking water. Actually, Mother really hoped that you and Sinyu could be together. Unfortunately, in the end, you still didn't agree, Xia Zi continued. Feelings can't be forced, Ning Chen said as he drank a mouthful of wine. He had always believed that love was a matter between 2 people, and not a matchmaker's word from their parents. This was the biggest conflict between him and this world. It was also the only thing that he couldn't compromise on. The 2 of them drank more and more wine. They emptied jugs one after another. However, it wasn't that easy for a 9th-rank martial artist to get drunk. When the sky was about to brighten, Ning Chen left. He sat on the ghost palanquin and returned to the underworld. An hour later, Xia Zi also stood up. He waved his hand to disperse the alcohol in his body and walked toward the imperial palace. Ascension Valley was on the eastern side of the Grand Xia. It was close to the edge of the continent. It was an unknown place with picturesque mountains and rivers. A large waterfall fell from the sky, splashing water 30 meters into the air. The mist was hazy, and birds sang. It was like a paradise on earth. Outside Ascension Valley, a figure slowly walked over. Behind him was a simple sword rack. There were 5 different swords on it. Each step he took was the same distance, the same speed, and the same precision. In the Divine Continent, there were very few descriptions of Ascension Valley. This was a truly unknown place. There were far too many secrets buried within. When Prince Yen walked in, he immediately felt a strong pressure coming at him. Unfamiliar expert, this is not a place you should have come to. A cold voice rang out from the depths of the valley, warning him. I've come to ask for a drop of phoenix blood, said Grand Prince Yen calmly. Impossible. Please leave, replied the cold voice. Then I'll go get it myself, said Grand Prince Yen indifferently. How dare you? An angry voice came from the depths of Ascension Valley. The next moment, a rumbling sound came from the horizon. The wind and clouds changed. A huge palm formed and slammed down. Grand Prince Yen was not afraid at all. He clenched his fist and a red sword flew out. It slashed the sky and scattered the wind and clouds. Rumble. The ground shook and cracked. A powerful aura filled the endless yellow soil. It was cold and dark. It was as if it did not belong to this world. A decaying body rushed out of the darkness. The power buried deep in Ascension Valley could not bear it any longer and walked out. The moment it appeared, the world suddenly darkened. The murky aura of impending death was bone-chilling. It was abnormally terrifying. It filled the world and made the sky turbid. The figure in the gray fog opened its eyes. The aura of death was so thick that it could not be dissolved. There was no trace of life. Most of the old monsters were buried in their coffins, but they were frightening. The space shook again and again, unable to contain their existence. Whoosh! Rain fell from the gray sky. The road started to become muddy. Gradually, a second figure climbed out of the ground, followed by a third, a fourth. There were 7 figures in a row. They were all shrouded in gray fog. The aura of death connected to the sky. They were facing off against the legendary figures of the Xia dynasty. Their auras were at their peak. The sky became darker and darker. Not a single ray of sunlight could penetrate. 7 Xiantian lords, a terrifying lineup. This was the hidden trump card of the unknown lands. At this moment, they finally bared their bloody fangs. The 7 figures were peerlessly terrifying. They stood there like an endless black hole, devouring everything around them. In the next moment, a strange phenomenon appeared behind the 7 of them. A black ocean evolved with raging waves that reached a height of 300 meters. Stars fell one after another, but they couldn't even make a splash. This was a sea of death that annihilated all life. Once one fell into it, they would never be able to climb out for all eternity. Grand Prince Yen was as calm as usual. He waved his hand and a green sword appeared. Suddenly, green and red reflected each other. The sword light broke through the void. Chapter 169. When the 7 Khanate experts worked together, their power was earth-shattering. A black ocean trapped the sky and covered the stars. It was terrifying. Prince Yen held the green and red swords in his hands. One of them was covered in frost, while the other was covered in heat waves. He fought against the 7 without being at a disadvantage. In the Ascension Valley, the sky and earth were in turmoil. The collapse of the ground continued to spread. This was the most terrifying battle in the world. 8 Khanate experts working together was unimaginable. Among the 7 living fossils, there was no lack of old monsters in the 5th calamity. They were about to go through the 3 calamities. Their power was immeasurable. Prince Yen was not in a hurry. He waved his swords, stabbing, pointing, chopping, waving, and slashing. Every move was ordinary, but terrifyingly accurate. The 7 people's attacks were stuck in a quagmire. The more they fought, the more shocked they became. No matter how fierce their attacks were, they could not go any further under the sharpness of the green and red swords. They could feel that the stranger in front of them had not reached the 3 calamities realm, but his combat power was indeed terrifying. The 2 swords' attributes were completely opposite. The 7 people had a hard time dealing with them. Plus, their emotions changed. Eventually, a flaw appeared. Green and red breath at the same time, absolute chi. Prince Yen waved his swords faster. Streaks of green and red swords flew out, breaking through the gap between the 7 people. In that instant, Prince Yan's figure flashed rapidly. He waved his sword, and his green robe disappeared. When he reappeared, the sword light was like lightning. Boom, boom, boom. He waved his sword 7 times. The 7 people flew backward and landed on the ground. They vomited red blood and were seriously injured. Prince Yen sheathed his sword and strode into the valley. The powerful and unshakable power made the 7 people unable to stand up. Not only were they injured, but they were also shocked. Stranger, are you trying to provoke the anger of the Ascension Valley? Deep in the valley, the cold voice threatened again. Is it serious? Prince Yan's expression did not change. He said lightly. As soon as he finished speaking, the sand sword flew out and turned into a stream of light that shot into the depths of Ascension Valley. In the next moment, the sand sword fell straight down. In a huge explosion, the sky and earth were turned upside down and sand filled the sky. You! The existence deep in the Ascension Valley was shocked. Then, it was furious. A terrifying aura rose. It was about to come out. Don't be rash. At this moment, another voice rang out from the depths of the Ascension Valley. There's no need to lose half your life for a drop of phoenix blood. Give it to him. Phoenix blood is precious. How could it be given away so easily? Most importantly, they had to think of a way to separate the 10,000 heavy cavalry from Baimeng's 100,000 heavy cavalry. It was impossible for the Xia dynasty cavalry here to deal with Baimeng's heavy cavalry. If they were engulfed by the flood of 100,000 heavy cavalry, they would be devoured in an instant. However, it was easier said than done to separate the Baimeng cavalry from the heavy cavalry under Fan Lingyue's nose. 2 days ago, the barbarian king sent a letter saying that he can borrow 100,000 soldiers to help the Xia dynasty tide over this crisis, Xia Zi suddenly said. Ning Chen was startled and couldn't react for a moment. What did the barbarian king mean by this? He didn't believe that the barbarian dynasty would be so kind. Although the barbarian king had saved him and Qing Ning once in Nanjiang, that was because of Ah Man. The barbarian king's personal actions had nothing to do with the barbarian dynasty or Great Xia. No matter when, personal feelings and national affairs couldn't be mixed together. What condition? Ning Chen asked. The entire Nanjiang, Xia Zi replied. Ning Chen was speechless. The barbarian king really dared to ask for too much. What did Her Majesty say? Ning Chen asked. Her Majesty hasn't decided and is currently hesitating. She wants me to ask for your opinion, Xia Zi replied. Ning Chen sighed softly and said, actually, there's nothing to hesitate about. Ceding land is absolutely out of the question. The Xia dynasty's territory was protected by generations of blood. Not to mention the entire Nanjiang, we can't give up even an inch of land. The precedent of ceding land definitely couldn't be set. The bloody lessons of Huaxia's history were still vivid in their minds. Those 100 years of darkness caused Huaxia, which had a civilization of 5,000 years, to lose all of its dignity. Even now, it was still paying for the humiliation of those years. Xia Zi was silent for a moment before saying, Her Majesty's hesitation is actually understandable. The current situation of Great Xia is indeed not optimistic. The successive defeats have greatly affected the morale of Great Xia's army. Furthermore, the military forces within Great Xia's territory are being restrained too much, especially by the Eternal Night Cult. They suddenly have an additional 20,000 heavy cavalry. The Blackwater army and the reinforcements from the various cities are having a hard time resisting them. They need to constantly transfer troops over. Hearing this, Ning Chen narrowed his eyes and said, It's not impossible to borrow troops. We can ask His Majesty to send an important envoy to negotiate with them to show Great Xia's sincerity. If possible, Prince Hua would be the best candidate. Since the barbarian king is willing to borrow troops, it means that he has the intention to negotiate. Any deal would be asking for a sky-high price and haggling on the ground. Other than ceding land, all other conditions can be discussed. The barbarian king has a small population and is lacking in resources. What they need the most is not land, but food, spices, and medicinal herbs. Coincidentally, Great Xia has plenty of these things. Moreover, the purpose of sending Prince Hua over is to remind the barbarian king that Great Xia does not have to borrow troops from the barbarian dynasty. Let the barbarian king guess. At this point, Ning Chen paused and thought for a moment before continuing. As for True Pole Nation, send someone to inform Princess Miaoyu and cooperate with her to spread some rumors from the palace of True Pole Nation. It doesn't need to be too obvious. For this kind of thing, the more obscure the better. If it's too obvious, it will arouse suspicion. In addition, during the negotiation between the barbarian king and Prince Hua, he will definitely deliberately delay time to make Great Xia anxious. Therefore, we can send Prince Hua over with an imperial edict to set a time limit for the negotiation. With True Pole Nation waiting, the barbarian king won't dare to be too aggressive. Hearing Ning Chen's words, Xia Zi couldn't help but sigh. If he didn't know that Ning Chen was really only 17 years old, he would have suspected that the person beside him was an old fox who had lived for decades. I will tell Her Majesty these words. I just don't know if Fourth Imperial Uncle will have any problems. After all, father has trapped him for 20 years. Xia Zi sighed softly. Ning Chen didn't say anything, but he believed that Prince Hua would agree. In the current situation, it was still too early to think about the barbarian dynasty's reinforcements. The outcome of the negotiation between the two dynasties was still unknown. Moreover, even if the barbarian king sent out his troops, it would still take 2 months for the 100,000 barbarian soldiers to arrive in the north of Great Xia. As the saying goes, distant water cannot quench a present thirst. Too many changes could happen in 2 months. In the underworld, Prince Yen walked in and spread out his spiritual sense. However, he couldn't sense Ning Chen's aura. He couldn't help but frown. The entire underworld was empty. There wasn't a single person to be seen. Prince Yen continued to walk forward. When he sensed the restrictions in the depths of the underworld, he moved his feet and disappeared. This was the ghost woman's place of seclusion. Everything within a 10-mile radius was sealed. Prince Yen walked forward and touched the restriction. After a slight hesitation, he waved his hand and broke it. There were too many mechanisms and restrictions within a 10-mile radius. Unfortunately, in front of Prince Yen, they were like paper and couldn't withstand a single blow. In less than 15 minutes, all the restrictions outside the ghost woman's stone room were broken. Prince Yen opened the stone door and saw the only person inside. His frown deepened. At this moment, the ghost woman had reached a critical moment in her cultivation. The aura around her was surging. The power of the Ghost Baron, the Earth Scroll, the Sky Scroll, and the Life Scroll that Ning Chen had given her were all sublimated to the extreme. She was constantly trying to break through the Xiantian barrier. Prince Yan's expression was cold. When he sensed the familiar aura of the Life Scroll, a cold murderous intent flashed across his eyes. The Life Scroll. How could she have the power of the Life Scroll? In the sword rack, the red and green swords sensed Prince Yan's murderous intent and trembled violently. The swords had a sword aura. At this moment, they actually showed signs of flying out of their own accord. Prince Yen pressed his hands on the swords and said slowly, "Wait until dawn." Chapter 170. Time passed slowly. Prince Yen stood in the stone room, motionless, waiting for daybreak. In front of him, the ghost girl was at a crucial stage of cultivation. Her spiritual consciousness was tightly shut, and she knew nothing about the outside world. Prince Yen was a calm person and would not act rashly. That was why he decided to wait until daybreak. He knew very well that if Ning Chen didn't show up by daybreak, he would never come back. Outside the underworld, the ghost palanquin streaked across the night sky, rushing back. There were too many things that needed to be done today, and it took a lot of time. He hoped that he could make it in time. The sky outside was getting darker and darker. This was the last darkness before daybreak, and also the darkest moment of the night. The ghost palanquin sped across the northern part of the Great Xia dynasty, leaving behind a flash of black light that could not be seen by the naked eye. Just as the ghost palanquin was about 10 miles away from the fog forest, the eastern sky quietly changed. Lightning appeared, and flames burned the sky, forming a terrifying apocalyptic scene. In the ghost palanquin, Ning Chen's body was burning with flames. The bone-piercing pain attacked him again, as if he was being cut into pieces. After a while, the ghost palanquin rushed into the underworld. In the sky, the lightning dissipated, and the flames disappeared. Everything returned to normal. In the underworld, Ning Chen activated the life scroll. Frost surged and quickly suppressed the flames around him. In a short moment, he experienced the transition of life and death again. Ning Chen breathed heavily, his heart throbbing. Luckily, he managed to make it back in time. In the depths of the underworld, Prince Yan, who had waited until the last moment, released his hands from the sword rack. The next moment, the green and red swords flew out automatically, drawing two brilliant streaks of light. The green and red swords were threatening. The ghost girl was in great danger. At this moment, Prince Yan moved and blocked the green and red swords. With a wave of his hand, he put the swords back on the rack. At the entrance of the underworld, Prince Yan walked over and looked at Ning Chen in the wheelchair. He did not ask anything and only said calmly, "You're injured. Don't run around." Seeing his senior, Ning Chen felt much more relaxed. He took a deep breath and said, "I've finished some things." Prince Yan nodded slightly and said, "Come with me to the academy tonight." Ning Chen did not understand and asked, "Why are we going to the academy?" "You'll know when the time comes," Prince Yan answered. Ning Chen nodded as if he understood, but didn't ask any further. "Come with me." Prince Yan turned around and walked forward. Ning Chen followed and walked quietly behind him. The two of them walked into Ghost Lady's secluded meditation area. He believed that the ghost girl didn't do it on purpose. The two of them were just fooling around in desperation. In the world, all kinds of special bodies were unique. If they could be changed by a piece of the netherworld spring, then the special bodies would be worthless. 4 hours later, Ning Chen woke up. He looked at the two people in front of him blankly. His head was dizzy and he couldn't come back to his senses for a while. "Headmaster, I'll take him to get something. I'll take my leave first." Prince Yan cupped his fists and bowed politely. "Okay." The headmaster nodded and didn't stay. Prince Yan took Ning Chen away. They didn't return to the underworld. Instead, they went to the two tombs. Now, the two tombs had become forbidden areas in the southeast. No one dared to enter. Monsters were released from the yin and yang tombs. Even during the transition between life and death, they couldn't enter. Along the way, Ning Chen finally understood his current situation. Simply put, with the protection of the phoenix blood, he didn't have to worry about becoming a living dead. However, there was basically no possibility of curing this body. Prince Yan didn't mention the netherworld spring. He was determined to let Ning Chen suffer a little to teach him a lesson. The two of them came to the yin and yang tombs. Prince Yan glanced at the two tombs and said casually, "Pick one." Ning Chen was speechless. Domineering. Senior said that the king medicine was useful to him, but one wasn't enough. After so many days, he didn't know which tomb was for life and which tomb was for death. However, it seemed that Senior didn't care. The yin tomb. Ning Chen still chose the yin tomb. He felt that since the scroll of heaven was inside, there must be something even more incredible behind the two remaining doors. Prince Yan didn't say much. He walked to the entrance of the yin tomb, split the yin qi in the air with his sword, and walked in step by step. The yin tomb now looked completely different. Yin spirits were everywhere. Every few steps would trigger a large restriction. Yin qi filled the air. It was a land of death. Needless to say, he obviously chose the wrong place. Fortunately, he had come with Prince Yan. The green and red swords danced in the air like two dark rainbows. They cut through the mist and cleared the obstacles in front of them quickly. Neither the Yin spirits nor the restrictions could stop them. Ningchen walked behind them with his sword on his back. He was stunned. Awesome! He didn't know how many times he had seen this scene, but he was still shocked to see it again. When he and Ghost Girl came, they suffered a lot because of the Yin spirits. Not to mention, there were layers of restrictions and Yin Qi blocking them now. After a while, 4 headless horsemen appeared in front of them. However, their enemies were no longer Ning Chen and Ghost Girl, but the legends of the Xia Kingdom. The green and red swords flashed. Chapter 171. The dazzling mirror light fell from the sky like a divine waterfall, illuminating the world. It was unstoppable. It came from the ancient past, crossing time and space. It was shocking. The green sword was illuminated by the mirror light and its light dimmed. Almost at the same time, the red sword flew over. The green and red joined hands to block the mirror light. However, after a short pause, the 2 swords were sent flying and stabbed into the ground. Ning Chen was shocked. He saw the mirror light coming, but it was too late to dodge. Just then, Yen Qin Prince moved. His figure flashed and he pulled out the abyss. The black sword light fell, creating a huge ravine that shook the world. The sword light and mirror light collided, causing the void to tremble. After a while, it could no longer withstand the terrifying power and shattered with a bang. In the violent storm, the green robe and black hair danced in the wind. He was as immovable as a mountain. Ning Chen came back to his senses and subconsciously looked behind the door. In the huge stone room, there was only an ancient mirror floating on a stone platform. It was simple and majestic, extraordinary and extraordinary. Yen Qin Prince walked in and broke the seal. He took the mirror and threw it over. Give it to someone. Ning Chen took the mirror and looked it over. He couldn't see anything special about it, so he put it away. He would study it in the future. A treasure valued by a sage at the 3 Disasters realm must be extraordinary. However, he didn't need it. It would be good to give it to a man to protect her. The 6th door was broken. There was only one left. Yen Qin Prince hesitated and didn't make a move. If he guessed correctly, the coffin of the tomb's owner was hidden behind the 7th door. However, it was at this moment that the 7th gate suddenly opened. In the blink of an eye, the entire great necropolis changed. Everything reversed, and the eternal world of darkness vanished. Stars twinkled in the sky, and boundless light poured down from the 9 heavens. A sigh came from the void. A blurry figure walked out. The world changed color. Tens of thousands of years couldn't hide his peerless beauty. One could feel that this was an invincible man. His body was tall and straight. His shoulder-length hair was as white as snow. The vicissitudes of life filled the air mercilessly. A hero in his twilight years was so clear. The aura of supremacy covered the entire starry sky. Rays of divine light fell from the sky and covered his body. The sage was in his twilight years, but he was still so brilliant that it made the world lose its color. It was hard to believe that this was the afterglow of his old age. The ancient realm suddenly moved, awakening from its slumber. Primal chaos surged, and circle after circle of ripples spread out. It flew out from Ning Chen's body and landed next to the man. It trembled as if it was weeping, expressing its endless longing. The man retracted his gaze and looked at the wailing ancient realm cultivator next to him. He sighed softly and reached out to touch the mirror, as if he were comforting an old friend. Strange scenes appeared in the void. Streak after streak of light began to condense. Under the setting sun, a woman was playing the zither. Her appearance was extremely beautiful, and her temperament was otherworldly. Only, her fine black hair was already dyed with snow, her time having passed. Wavering moon. The ancient sage's body trembled. He suddenly turned his head back from tens of thousands of years away. The entire great tomb rumbled, and the stars continuously exploded. The dome of heaven bloomed with the most beautiful fireworks. A pair of eyes that had experienced the vicissitudes of time looked over through the primal chaos. The man took a step forward, crossing tens of thousands of li of starry sky. The stars in the ancient tomb world began to wither. Streak after streak of light streaked across the sky. More and more light streaked across the sky, becoming denser and denser. In the end, it was as if it was raining, dazzling the eyes. The heavens descended. The ancient sage's terror exceeded the scope of the world's imagination. With a single step, the entire world seemed to be destroyed. Stars fell, heaven and earth trembled. It was a world-shocking scene. A terrifying sign. At this moment, the ancient sage seemed to be walking out of time and space. His blurry figure gradually revealed a corner of his clothes. The tattered black battle clothes emitted an unchanging coldness. Bloodstains were everywhere, a testament to the ancient sage's accomplishments in his life. The primal chaos gradually dissipated. A trace of white was exceptionally dazzling. This man who had once protected the common people, who was invincible in the heavens and earth, had truly aged. Even though his body was still tall and straight, it could not hide the whiteness of his hair. You said that you would return. Under the setting sun, the woman was already very tired. Her eyes were dim, as if she would reach the end of her life at any moment. The sound of the zither was bleak. The tears of the woman dripped onto the zither. Her beauty had faded away, yet she was unwilling to leave. Wavering moon. Seeing this scene, the primal chaos around the ancient sage exploded. An indomitable figure walked out. The heavens and earth rumbled, thousands of rays of auspicious light shot out. With a single step, he crossed the starry sky and arrived in front of the painting in an instant. The man's body was trembling. His face was filled with the vicissitudes of time. Although he didn't look old, he was no longer young. His hair was as white as snow. This was an indisputable fact. The sound of the zither lingered in the air. The woman's eyes dimmed as she stared into the distance. Gradually, she was filled with disappointment and despair. Her tears fell like rain, scattering her last hope. The person she had been waiting for would never return. Their fate had come to an end. 1,000 years of waiting had come to nothing. The setting sun was as red as blood, and the woman's face began to age. At the beginning, a gentle red light rose up and stopped the aging process. However, the woman's body began to disappear. Starlight scattered in all directions, and bit by bit, she disappeared from the world. At the end of reincarnation, did he ever think that in a distant place, there was still a woman waiting silently for him? Was it a question, or was it reluctance? The final sound echoed through the great tomb. The ancient sage's expressions changed, endless pain flashed through their eyes as they closed them. Their trembling hands tried to grab the painting, but the painting instantly shattered. The sound of the zither stopped. Time was merciless, tens of thousands of years had passed. Everything vanished like smoke into thin air, unable to be retained. The ancient sage was so high and mighty. At this moment, he was no different from an ordinary man who had lost his true love. His tears quietly fell. Heaven and earth fell silent. Even the stars didn't dare to shine again. A soft sigh echoed in the void. The sage Gemini did not say anything. He reached out and touched the guqin in front of the woman. The sorrow in his eyes was so thick that it could not be dispersed. The next moment, the body of the sage of old gradually began to disappear. A cold wind blew, and a desolate scene appeared. The ancient realm fell from the sky. Everything returned to normal. It was as if it had never appeared. Ning Chen took the ancient realm and sighed inside. What had just happened was just the ancient sage's afterimage and the ancient realm's imprint. However, he had still felt a pressure that surpassed the heavens and earth. Even such an existence was powerless in the face of the death of a woman. Time was merciless. No one could resist it. He didn't know what had happened 10,000 years ago. However, there was no doubt that the ancient sage had returned too late. He hadn't even been able to see his woman for the last time. The seventh door was already open. Within the stone room, there were 2 coffins, but they were both empty. To the ancient sage, the most important thing was still that woman. He hadn't been able to accompany her for a long time when she was alive, but after she died, he had to accompany her for a long time. "Let's go," said Imperial Prince Yen calmly. "Yes." Ning Chen nodded softly. The 2 of them left the Yin tomb and walked toward the Yang tomb. This time, Yen Qin didn't have Ning Chen follow him. He entered the Yang tomb himself. Since the Yin tomb contained the coffins of the ancient sage, then the Yang tomb was just a fake tomb. No one knew what dangers lay inside. An hour later, dawn arrived on the eastern horizon. Seeing that the night was about to pass, Yen Qin walked out. However, she felt that things weren't so simple. "Men," said Fan Lingyue. "Present." A general walked in and respectfully waited for orders. "How far are we from the army behind us?" asked Fan Lingyue. 120 miles, replied the general. "Why are we so far?" Fan Lingyue frowned. 2 days ago, the imperial guards of the Great Xia were really tight. "The soldiers have been marching, and the troops behind us couldn't keep up," said the general nervously. "Useless." Fan Lingyue slammed the table and raged, "You didn't even report such an important matter. What's the use of having you?" The general was so frightened that he shivered. He immediately knelt down and kowtowed, begging for mercy. "Spare me." Chapter 172. The general was dragged out and given 20 beatings. Fan Lingyue walked in front of the map and looked at the location of the army, deep in thought. A few days ago, the Great Xia guards had been intercepting them, but their reaction was getting slower and slower. If this was a deceptive tactic, the goal was worth thinking about. She was confident that if they fought on the plains, the Beimeng cavalry would not fear anyone. Great Xia's Jingwu Duke would also not choose to fight on the plains. The Great Xia guards were tight at the front and loose at the back. They were obviously trying to increase the distance between the Beimeng army and them. As for their goal, it would be to split them up and destroy them or burn their rations. 120 miles was not enough for the Beimeng cavalry to be left in the dust. There was not enough time, and the possibility of a battle was not high. Hence, their goal was obvious. Thinking about this, Fan Lingyue said, "Qing Wuyo." "Present." Qing Wuyo walked into the tent and said respectfully, "Immediately bring 7,000 light cavalry over. Great Xia might be eyeing their rations." Fan Lingyue instructed with a serious expression. "Yes." Qing Wuyo accepted the order and left the tent. After Qing Wuyo left, Fan Lingyue stared at the map in front and continued to think. Beimeng's rations could be considered sufficient. The central plains were rich, and the few cities that they had taken down all had large amounts of storage. Furthermore, their rations were sent in batches and were heavily guarded. Even if Great Xia wanted to take their rations, it would not be so simple. Actually, no matter the time, rations were the key to war. Great Xia's actions were not strange. However, Great Xia's Jingwu Duke was a person who used troops more than he was strange. Such a strategy was not his style. Fan Lingyue thought of a person, a lifelong rival. They were the people who knew each other the best in the world. Unfortunately, they were destined to be rivals. Fan Lingyue walked out of the tent and stood quietly in front of it. Looking at the scenery of Great Xia, her eyes were filled with determination. In a few more months, this prosperous land would no longer belong to Great Xia alone. When the Beimeng soldiers saw the beautiful figure in front of the tent, no one dared to disturb her. The night slowly passed, and when the sun shone down, a soldier rushed over on a horse. After dismounting, he quickly knelt down and said anxiously, reporting to the advisor, "The Great Xia army ambushed our rations, and 20% of our rations were destroyed. General Qing sent me to deliver the news." "Understood, you can leave." Fan Lingyue said indifferently. "Yes." The soldier withdrew and hurriedly left. Fan Lingyue's expression was the same as before, without any change. Since he had already expected this, there was nothing to be surprised about. As the saying goes, before the three armies move, the provisions must move first. Destroying the enemy's supply lines or supply teams was indeed a good method. This time, Baimeng's army was different from before. The grain was sent in batches to prevent Great Xia from doing that. 20% of grain was not much, and it was worth it to prove Great Xia's goal. When the army was about to break camp, Qing Wuyo rushed back and reported the situation in detail. After listening, Fan Lingyue asked, "How long until the wheat grains in the north are harvested?" "In the next 3 to 5 days, Qing Wuyo replied. Fan Lingyue nodded. His eyes narrowed slightly as he said softly, "In the next few days, we have to step up our defenses. Great Xia will still have designs on our rations." "Why?" Qing Wuyo asked in confusion. Their wariness of the grain would only get tighter and tighter. Even if Great Xia succeeded in their sneak attack, they would have to pay a huge price, so there was no need for that. "They're forcing us to change our path," Fan Lingyue said calmly. Qing Wuyo did not understand, and Fan Lingyue did not explain further. She just followed the orders. She could basically confirm that the person behind this plan was Ning Chen. The plan at the start was really good. Using a series of attacks to disrupt Baimeng's formation, and then waiting for a chance to sneak attack their grain. The first sneak attack was something she did not notice in time, and it was also the only weakness of Baimeng. Unfortunately, Great Xia was not good enough at the last step, and they only destroyed 20% of their grain. Baimeng's grain was much more abundant than what Great Xia had expected. Losing 20% was not much. It was a very unfortunate step. If Baimeng did not have enough grain, this loss of grain might have forced her to change her path. The wheat grains in the north were ripe, and it was time to harvest. If she wanted to gather grain, there were only 2 paths she could choose. Due to the limited land in the southwest, the wheat grains were scattered, and it was too troublesome for the army to gather them. As for the wheat grains in the south and southeast, they were densely planted, and it was easy to gather the grain they wanted. Great Xia only needed to block one of the 2 paths, and the remaining path was not up to her to choose. The real problem was where Baimeng would go after harvesting the grain. Great Xia would definitely block the south, forcing them to go down the southwest path. Now, it did not seem like much. However, the southwest direction they were going was actually the northwest of Great Xia. The further south one went on the northwest path, the more mountains and hills there were. No matter the time, this was a terrain that cavalry did not want to encounter. The idea was not bad, and she looked very far ahead. However, there were always changes in the plan. Ning Chen was not in the army, and he could not do anything about these changes. There was never a perfect plan in the world, and any ingenious plan needed to be adjusted at the right time. Great Xia's Duke Jingwu was a genius at arranging troops, but in terms of scheming, he was still lacking. Now that Great Xia had made their move, it was time for her to respond. In the Great Xia Guard's barracks, Duke Jingwu sat in his tent. Below him, the 6 generals sat on both sides, discussing future war matters. Now, the 160,000 guards had split into 2 groups to block the Baimeng army. On the other side, the blood-clad Marquis had taken a detour to the south to block the Baimeng army. Hearing the opinions of the generals, Duke Jingwu's brows were locked tight. Their current position was on the plains, and facing the Baimeng cavalry was not a wise decision. Although the Great Xia Guard's Legion Corps were the elites of the elites, facing the Baimeng cavalry on the plains, their chances of winning were slim. Baimeng did not have any reinforcements, so they were not willing to fight head-on. On the other hand, Great Xia had lost too many times and could not afford to lose again. In the current situation, Baimeng still had the advantage. The only force that Great Xia had that could go head-to-head with Baimeng was the 160,000 guards. However, they could not grasp the rout of the Baimeng army, and their blocking was too passive. Jiming Marquis had provided a good idea. However, it was very difficult to execute. Although they had gained a lot from this first sneak attack, they had also lost a lot. The Beimeng army reacted quickly, and with the help of the cavalry, they were much harder to deal with than expected. The first sneak attack could not be said to be a success or a failure. It could only be said that the result was not ideal. "Duke, should we continue to send troops to block the Beimeng grain transport team?" asked a green-armored general. "Continue, but be careful. Beimeng should have set up an ambush," reminded Duke Jingwu. "I understand." The green-armored general cupped his fists. In the southern border of the Grand Xia, a beautiful girl was walking on the streets, asking for directions. "Uncle, how do I get to Taiyue City?" The girl was very likable, and her attitude was also not bad. The old man who was asking for directions enthusiastically pointed at her. He then asked, "Miss, are you from the Grand Xia?" "Uncle, how did you know?" asked a man curiously. "Ha, your attire is very unfamiliar. It doesn't seem like the customs of the Grand Xia," laughed the old man. "Oh." A man looked at her attire. She had not paid much attention to it. "Is this your first time in the southern border?" asked the old man. "No, I've been here before." A man shook her head. The old man smiled and advised, "Miss, since you've come to the southern border, you should change your attire. That will save you a lot of trouble." A man nodded thoughtfully. However, she hadn't run into any trouble. A man didn't know that any trouble she had run into had been taken care of by the people following her in secret. Otherwise, what kind of beautiful girl would be able to walk the streets safely for so many days? When she had no money, she would even randomly pick up silver. Picking it up once was luck. Picking it up twice was luck. Picking it up 3 times should be a bit suspicious. Half a day later, Man had changed out of her imperial attire. She had even taken off the bits and pieces of accessories on her head. Wearing a simple green dress, she once again began to walk and ask for directions. "Aunt, how do I get to Taiyue City?" "What a beautiful girl." The old woman smiled. "Thank you for your praise. How do I get to Taiyue City?" A man continued to ask. "Miss, why did you come out alone? Where's your family?" The old woman held a man's hand as she asked. "I came out to find someone. I snuck out." "How do I get to Taiyue City?" A man persistently asked. Come. "Miss, my house is just next door. Come over and have a seat. It won't be too late to hurry on your way after drinking some tea." The old woman was delighted and enthusiastically pulled a man into an alley. A man felt a bit thirsty and obediently followed along. She didn't know that some alleys were called brothel alleys, and some ants were called brothel keepers. The bodyguard following them in secret felt a headache coming on. Did this little princess not feel that something was wrong? That old woman's makeup was so bad that even her own mother wouldn't be able to recognize her. With a single glance, one could tell that she wasn't from a good family. Unfortunately, a man didn't feel anything. That was because she had never seen any brothel alleys. She also didn't know what a brothel keeper was. In the past, with the protection of the barbarian king, she rarely even left the barbarian palace. She didn't know anything about the outside world. Later, she secretly ran out with Ning Chen and came into contact with quite a few things. However, those were things that Ning Chen wanted her to see. "Come, miss, have some tea." The old woman poured a cup of tea and handed it over. Her smile was like a flower that had grown out of a bad flower. "Thank you, auntie." A man received the tea and politely said, "Is the person you're looking for in Taiyue City?" The old woman sat down and poured herself a cup of tea. She took a sip and asked, "I don't know." A man shook her head. "Then what's the person you're looking for? What does he do?" The old woman beat around the bush. "He's called Ning Chen." A man replied. After saying that, she thought for a moment and continued with uncertainty, I think he's Grand Xia's Jiming Marquis. Pfft. Hearing this name, the old woman spat out the tea she hadn't swallowed. Chapter 173. Cough, cough. The old woman choked on her tea and violently coughed for a long time. In the Grand Xia, the 3 words knowing fate Marquis were definitely not a good symbol. Miss really likes to joke. The old woman naturally didn't believe her. She rubbed her chest and forced a smile. I'm not joking, seriously said Amon. The old woman didn't want to talk about this topic anymore. Many people in the Grand Xia knew that the knowing fate Marquis had died to the wrath of the heavens. In truth, Amon also didn't know much about Ning Chen. Ever since she had returned to the barbarian palace, the barbarian king had rarely mentioned Ning Chen in front of Amon. When he couldn't hide it, he would just briefly mention it. Miss, wait a moment. I'll go get some fruit for you to eat on the way, said the old woman kindly. Thank you, Auntie. Amon smiled. The old woman quickly walked to the back of the hall. There were already several people waiting in the courtyard. What's going on? Asked an old man. A young chick has come. He doesn't seem to be a local. Based on his accent, he should be from the southern barbarian lands. This is business that has been delivered to your door. Do you want to take it or not? Yes. The old man nodded without the slightest hesitation. He waved his hand at the 3 people behind him and then quietly walked to the front of the hall. For the Grand Xia to have such unruly people like you, it's no wonder my king is worried about the princess. The sudden appearance of a figure came without any warning. The 5 of them didn't even have time to react before a saber light flashed and their heads flew 3 meters into the air. Their bodies collapsed, dyeing the ground red. Amon waited for almost an hour in the front hall, but the old woman still hadn't returned. She curiously walked to the back hall and shouted, Auntie, I'm leaving. The empty courtyard didn't receive a reply for a long time. Seeing no one return, Amon could only turn and leave. Her beautiful eyes were still filled with confusion. After Amon left, the 5 corpses and a large amount of silver from the back hall were thrown into the courtyard. The silver was dyed with blood and was extremely dazzling. 2 days later, Amon was on her way to Taiyue City when a young figure slowly walked over. His green robes were simple yet noble. His handsome and calm face made him look even more extraordinary. There was a simple and unadorned sword rack on his back, which contained 4 different swords. The person walked step by step, neither fast nor slow, not even a speck of mud staining his body. A man's eyes lit up and a brilliant smile appeared on her pretty face. She jogged over and hugged the person's arm, happily saying, Senior, what a coincidence. A faint smile appeared on Prince Yan's calm face as he said, What a coincidence. Where are you going? Man smiled. To the west. I happened to meet you. Senior, why are we going to the west? To fight, said Prince Yan. Fighting isn't good, said a man seriously. Prince Yan smiled. He's a bad person. Oh, said a man, agreeing with this explanation. The journey from Nanjiang to the west of the Grand Xia was very long. Prince Yan had a burden behind him, so he didn't know when they would arrive. Half a month later, the 2 of them finally left Nanjiang. After man got used to the weight of the sword rack, she walked much faster. No matter what, this little girl still had some foundation in the martial path. It was true that a man didn't like to cultivate. After 10 years, the speed at which she reached the 4th rank was so slow that it made one's hair stand on end. However, considering man's attitude of wanting to fish for 10 days, being able to reach the 4th rank was also a strange thing. On the other side, the war between Northern Meng and the Grand Xia changed again. Duke Jingwu sent troops to attack Northern Meng's grain transport team. After a few times, he finally succeeded once and destroyed a large amount of Northern Meng's grain. The process was very tragic. Both Northern Meng and the Grand Xia paid a huge price. Northern Meng set up many ambushes, but the Grand Xia wouldn't fall for it so easily. After a few exchanges, they finally grasped the weakness of Northern Meng's uneven division of troops. They used the Imperial Army as bait to attract Northern Meng's attention. Afterward, the 5,000 elite cavalry of the Divine Wind Battalion took the chance and destroyed Northern Meng's heavily guarded grain camp. The Divine Wind Battalion moved quickly. They came quickly and retreated quickly. When Northern Meng reacted, the grain camp was already on fire. The Divine Wind Battalion was the most elite Imperial Army camp in the Grand Xia. These 5,000 elite cavalry were strong enough to fight against 10. The ambush set by Northern Meng couldn't be stopped and they suffered heavy casualties. However, just when everyone in the Grand Xia commander's tent thought that Northern Meng would gather grain along the southeast or the south due to the lack of grain, Fan Lingyue suddenly changed the route of the army in advance. They quickly went south along the southwest direction, causing the Marquis of the Bloody Garb to miss. No one knew what was going on except for the military advisor of Northern Meng. This was because that batch of grain was given to the Grand Xia by her. The grain was real and the soldiers who died in battle couldn't be faked. The only illusion was the amount of grain. A lie was always 70% true and 30% false, making it difficult to distinguish. War was the same. Since she saw through the Grand Xia's plan, how could she not give them a surprise? His constitution was cold, so he could only practice half of it. The name of this half was very special. It was called the art of clear snow. It was perfected by generations of Taoist sages after tens of thousands of years. They wanted to compete with the heavenly tomes. Among the heavenly tomes, other than the life scroll, all had their own unique mental cultivation methods and moves. Only the life scroll was an exception. Therefore, the Taoist sages created this secret method to make up for the shortcomings of the life scroll. The art of clear snow was the first method under the heavenly tomes. To a certain extent, the 4 words in the middle could be removed. Chapter 174. Ning Chen's cultivation lasted for another half a month. The art of clear skies before snow was complicated and difficult to cultivate. It was comparable to the heavenly writing. During this half a month, the situation in Great Xia became even more serious. After breaking free from the encirclement, the Beimeng army continued down south, and it was hard to stop them. The soldiers that Great Xia hurriedly moved over from various places were too weak compared to the Beimeng iron cavalry. The Great Xia cavalry 300 miles east of the imperial city was still practicing the tactics that Ning Chen left behind. Xia Zi watched day and night, waiting for the moment to succeed. In the west of Great Xia, Prince Yan and Ah Man were heading west. They were not far from their destination. In the west, Marquis Triumphant Return and the Blackwater Army tried their best to stop the Eternal Night Cult's invasion. With the help of the surrounding cities, they barely managed to maintain the stalemate. In the southeast, Menyang country invaded. Marquis Loyal and Brave fought a tough battle. 150,000 Great Xia border soldiers fought a bloody battle to protect the southeast of Great Xia from being invaded. Now, the most urgent battlefield was in the north. Fan Lingyue's army was advancing deeper and deeper. Great Xia could not stop them. 100,000 cavalry showed their abilities, shocking the world. This was the first time in history that more than 100,000 cavalry had appeared. This was a true flood of molten iron. Nothing could stop them. Fan Lingyue's management of the army was strict. The fighting quality of the army was abnormally strong. 7 years of training was all for this war. 300,000 troops entered and left Great Xia. Excluding the 50,000 left at Heaven's Gate, there were less than 200,000 left. However, compared to Great Xia's losses, these sacrifices were less than 1/10. In the first half of the war, because of Emperor Xia's arrogance and stupidity, Great Xia missed many opportunities and suffered defeat after defeat. In the middle half of the war, Great Xia had many internal problems, causing a great loss of national strength. Now, the war between the two dynasties had entered the second half. The survival of Great Xia depended on this final game. The negotiations between Great Xia and the barbarian dynasty had a breakthrough. The barbarian king demanded an exorbitant price. Prince Hua agreed to most of the conditions, but he did not relent on the matter of ceding land. The negotiation period was only 14 days. Great Xia's attitude was clear. They would fight for it with all their might, but it was not necessary to succeed. In fact, the barbarian king had some doubts when he saw Prince Hua. He thought of the marriage between Great Xia and True Extreme Nation. It was a fact that True Extreme Country and Great Xia were not on good terms. However, there was no true friendship between countries. There were only interests. In tomorrow's battle, they might be able to see if the martial monarch of Eternal Night Cult was truly invincible. As night fell, Prince Yen stood in front of the moon. His green robe fluttered in the wind. His body gradually merged with the world, as if he would break through the sky at any moment. The current legend of Great Xia was a true genius of the generation. He had practiced martial arts for 27 years, crossed the Khanate realm, and transcended 5 tribulations. If there was one person in the world who could fight a 5th Tribulation Realm cultivator against a 3 Calamity Realm cultivator, it would be Prince Yen of Great Xia. In the army, the patrolling soldiers looked at the distant figure in the night. No one dared to disturb him. Of course, there was one exception. Senior, a man ran over, instantly breaking this transcendent atmosphere. "What's wrong?" Prince Yen asked with a smile. "Here's a peach for you," said a man happily as she handed over one of the 2 big peaches. "Where did you pick it?" Prince Yen asked softly. The peach was very fresh. It was obvious that it had just been picked. It was impossible for the army to have it. "There," said a man with a smile as she pointed to the southeast. Prince Yen smiled and didn't say anything. This girl really knew how to run. "Senior, you have to win tomorrow. Good luck." A man clenched her fists and encouraged him. "Okay," said Prince Yen softly. "I'm going to sleep." After eating the peach, a man clapped her hands and said goodbye with a smile. She then jogged back to her tent. The peaceful night quickly passed. When the sun rose the next day, the heavy cavalry of Eternal Night Cult and Great Xia's Blackwater army were both on alert. They faced each other 10 kilometers away, nervously waiting for the battle to begin. The martial monarch appeared. He was wearing black armor and the Tianhuang halberd was ferocious. At that moment, the sound of footsteps could be heard from the distance. A young figure walked over in the light of dawn. His steps were neither fast nor slow. Each step was steady. Everyone couldn't help but look over. In front of the heavy cavalry, the 3 generals narrowed their eyes. Was this the legend of Great Xia? He was really too young. "Please," said the martial monarch, giving the strong cultivator in front of him enough respect. "Please," replied Prince Yen. After that, the martial monarch moved. He stepped on the ground and concentrated his divine power on his halberd. The world-shocking power caused the ground to crack. The powerful divine power spread all the way to Prince Yen. Facing the divine power, Prince Yen did not move at all. With a slight shift of his mind, the green and red swords flew out and streaked across the sky. They sliced through the air in front of the cracked ground. In the next moment, a huge gully appeared. The 2 forces collided with each other and the color of the sky changed. Everything within 10 kilometers seemed to have been hit by a heavenly tribulation. The ground kept shaking. The 2 huge cracks continued to spread until they were 30 kilometers away. The 2 armies had no choice but to retreat another 5 kilometers. They watched the battle from 30 kilometers away. The power of a Xiantian expert wasn't something a human could resist. And a battle on the level of 3 disasters was even more disastrous. If you got too close and got caught in the shockwaves, it would be difficult to not die. In front of the Blackwater army, Marquis Victorious Return was silently watching the battle. He didn't have the slightest intention of helping. This was a fair battle. He wouldn't interfere. A man stood next to Marquis Victorious Return, nervously clenching her fists. She wasn't an idiot. Naturally, she could see that this battle wasn't simple. Good luck, good luck, good luck. A man was constantly cheering for Prince Yen. Ning Chen had taught her that when she couldn't help, cheering was also useful. Green and red breath at the same time. In the middle of the battle, the two swords flew into the sky. They were like rainbows as they transformed into streams of swords that rushed towards the martial monarch in front of them. It was a move that couldn't be dodged. It was the pinnacle of sword techniques. It was fast, accurate, and direct without any complicated changes. It was an ultimate move that sealed off all paths of retreat. The martial monarch focused. He didn't dare to be careless. The heavenly desolate halberd raised into the sky. His vast body drew upon the power of heaven and earth. The halberd light soared into the sky and collided with the streams of swords. In the shocking collision, the majority of the streams of swords turned invisible. But there was still a sword that quietly broke through the obstruction and passed through the martial monarch's body. The unrivaled martial monarch was forced back half a step. He was the first to be injured. The expert martial monarch wiped his hand and the bleeding stopped. For the first time since the start of the battle, he was completely focused. On the other side, Prince Yen calmly watched. He didn't take the opportunity to attack. This battle wouldn't end so quickly. At the beginning, it was only a test. In the Netherworld Underworld, Ning Chen stood at the entrance of the Netherworld Underworld. He looked towards the distant west with worry in his eyes. Although he had confidence in his senior, he couldn't help but worry. Normal people only had one Qi. There would always be times when their true Qi couldn't keep up. Especially when changing techniques, it was even more obvious. On the other hand, martial monarchs with two Qis could heal as they fought. As long as it wasn't an irreversible injury, they were practically undying. That was also the main reason why martial monarchs were undefeatable. There were only two ways to defeat a martial monarch. The first was to use absolute strength to suppress the martial monarch so that his healing speed couldn't keep up with the speed of his injuries. The second was to destroy the threat of the dual Qis. The first method didn't even need to be considered. In this world, there were people who could fight against martial monarchs, but there was no one who could completely suppress a martial monarch. Of course, if two experts above the three disaster realm joined hands, perhaps they could do it. But that was impossible. After all, in this world, there was only one person as shameless as the Golden Staff Imperial Teacher. So, the only feasible method was to destroy the threat of the dual Qis. Chapter 175. In the west of the Great Xia, the Blackwater Army and the cavalry of the God sect were facing each other. The battle between the two armies had reached its climax. After the initial probing, both of them brought out their true strength. The clash of swords and halberds caused the sky to collapse and the earth to sink. Huge gullies appeared between the two of them. The powerful shockwaves caused everything around them to turn invisible. Broken stones filled the sky and scattered 3,000 feet away. This was a battle between true experts. It was fair and just. No one else could interfere. The martial lord's might was astonishing. The Sky Baron halberd was like a weapon that could destroy the world. Every time he waved it, a huge crack appeared in the sky. It was difficult to withstand this power. The Yen Prince raised the two swords in his hands as if they were light. One was fast, the other was slow. The fast one suppressed the enemy first, the slow one neutralized the enemy's power. The two swords worked together. Their attacks were fierce and their defense was tight. They were not at a disadvantage at all. The Yen Prince of the Great Xia is so capable, said a general of the God sect in shock. This person's sword seems to be able to predict the enemy's moves. He can always react before the martial lord makes a move. Unbelievable, said another general of the God sect in confusion. It's not that he can predict the enemy's moves. The third general of the god sect slowly shook his head and denied, "It's accurate and very fast. The martial lord's moves have just started and the red sword has already attacked. The martial lord didn't have enough power and his moves were already weak. That's why it seems like the opponent has predicted the enemy's moves." The other two focused. After observing for a long time, they discovered that the truth was as the former said. They couldn't help but frown. This battle seemed to be much more difficult than they had imagined. Of course, none of the three generals thought the martial lord would lose because he had never lost before. That included when he faced the Sword of Sword City. The battle between the strongest was unimaginably fierce. The martial lord dominated the world with his unparalleled power. He could break 10,000 techniques with his power alone. The Sky Baron halberd was ferocious and had been stained with the blood of countless experts. The legend of the Great Xia had cultivated for 27 years. He had formed his own way of the sword and looked down on the past and present. The red sword in the Yen prince's hand was like fire. It was astonishingly fast and left many wounds on the martial lord's body. However, the martial lord's recovery ability was unparalleled. No matter how fast the Yen prince's sword was, he could not break the legend of the martial lord's immortal body. 3 moves of the Imperial Sky, 9 evils breaking sun chop. Tianhuang held up the sky. Around the martial monarch, thousands of evil energies rose continuously. Black gas spread, and the world lost its color. The sun-breaking technique frightened ghosts and gods. Everyone was shocked, especially the Marquis of Triumph. His expression was extremely serious. That day, he had been injured by this very attack. The strength of a martial lord did not only lie in their undying body. Even in terms of absolute battle power, they were unparalleled in the world. Prince Yen quickly sheathed his green sword. He waved his hand and a beam of light darker than the night flew out. It swallowed everything, including the surrounding space. Abyss condensation. The expressions of the three generals changed greatly. The divine sect and the people of the world had been searching for the sealed sword for thousands of years. One sword forbids martial arts, no Tao under the heavens. The Sword of Seals, the forbidden technique. The abyss in Prince Yan's hand swallowed up the sky and earth. Black light spread out and destroyed everything. Extreme moves collided, causing a huge explosion. Heaven and earth once again suffered a calamity. Sand was thrown into disorder, and the earth was lifted up. The destruction was unbearable to look at. Paw! The sound of blood dripping could be heard. In the sand, 2 figures appeared. Blood quietly dripped from the corners of their mouths and dripped down to their feet, dyeing the earth red. The 2 were both injured. After one move, they were evenly matched. Prince Yan's eyes gradually turned cold. His figure flashed and he instantly appeared in front of the martial monarch. The speed of his red sword suddenly increased. One sword was fast, and the other was even faster. It was hard to keep up. The halberd in the martial monarch's hand met the sword. He was not afraid at all. If he could not win in terms of absolute speed, then he would use absolute power to break through. The martial monarch's tactic of not dodging caused the power of the legendary sword of the Xia dynasty to decrease by 30%. The advantage of the undying body was completely revealed. In the deadlock, it was hard to tell who had the upper hand. This was a battle between strength and speed. It was also a battle of patience. 3 disaster-level Xiantian experts had sufficient true qi and could use the power of heaven and earth. Unless there was an absolute suppression, it would be difficult to determine the winner in a short time. Between the 2 armies, more than 20 miles of land had already collapsed. There were huge gullies everywhere, and the ground was 3 feet deep. It was extremely terrifying. Beside Marquis Kaixuan, man's cultivation was limited. She could not see the situation of the battlefield clearly. She simply closed her eyes and silently said, "Senior, you can do it. Senior, you can do it." Although most of the soldiers in the 2 armies could not see the situation of the battle clearly, looking at the terrifying scene of the sky collapsing in front of them. Each one was more shocked than the other. In the past, the battle between Marquis Kaixuan and the martial monarch would try to avoid people as much as possible. Moreover, the battle would end very quickly. It was the first time for them to see a battle between three disaster-level Xiantian experts. It was hard to believe that this was not human strength, but divine power. It was no wonder that a barren city in the east could shake the world. It was no wonder that a broken temple in the southwest could become a Buddhist country. With such an expert here, not to mention 1,000 soldiers, even 10,000 horses would not be able to do anything. The sun rose in the west. In the blink of an eye, it was already noon. The battle between the two was white-hot. Prince Qin Huang's two swords, one attacking and one defending. The red sword's sharpness had already reached its peak. It was so fast that only a rainbow was left. It could no longer be seen by the naked eye. The martial monarch did not dodge. He was 70% attacking and 30% defending. The divine power was hard to block. The abyss-transforming divine power completely swallowed the abyss-transforming divine power. It became the biggest barrier for Prince Qin Huang to fight until now. Just as the sun was high in the sky, the martial monarch suddenly took a sword head-on. Immediately after, he pushed Prince Qin Huang back with a palm. He waved his halberd and condensed qi. The martial monarch's supreme martial art appeared again. 3 moves of the imperial sky, God destroying heaven. The peerless ominous weapon exploded with a power that surpassed the limits of the world. It was a move that could kill gods if gods blocked it. It was unstoppable. Facing the martial monarch's divine power, the red sword in Prince Qin Huang's hand and the abyss-condensing divine power all flew out. In the next moment, the sword frame began to tremble. The green sword soared into the sky. The 3 swords appeared together and revolved, forming a huge whirlpool. 3 swords in the sky, life and death contract. An endless rain of swords flew out of the whirlpool and crashed down. At the same time, the ominous weapons descended and collided violently. The strongest moves collided with the most shocking power. The ground within 20 miles collapsed with a loud rumble. Large chunks of earth were lifted up and collapsed, forming a terrifying scene of apocalypse. The soldiers of both armies were all frozen. They were completely stunned by this unimaginable scene. The martial monarch flew backward, and the legends were dyed red. In the violent aftermath, both of them were heavily injured. Up until now, the battle that seemed to be evenly matched finally started to tilt. As the two's true chi ran out, the martial monarch flipped his left hand and slapped out. The powerful palm force forced Prince Qin Huang in front of him. Dual sea of chi, alternating between attack and defense. At this moment, he displayed an absolute advantage. He changed his moves so quickly that it was unparalleled in the world. Prince Qin Huang forcefully raised his true chi and waved his hand. The sand sword flew out and turned into a sand waterfall in front of him. The power of the palm was shocking. With a bang, the sand waterfall dispersed and landed on Prince Qin Huang's body, bringing out a smear of red blood. The legend of the Great Xia was finally showing signs of defeat. What a pity! The 3 generals of the Eternal Night cult sighed. The legend of the Great Xia had already done enough. However, the martial monarch was still undefeatable. The outcome of this battle had already been decided. The next battle would be life and death. On the other side, the expression of the Marquis of Triumph's manner became abnormally heavy. Even the legend of the Great Xia was about to be defeated. Could it be that the martial monarch was truly undefeatable? No matter how delightful the battle is, there must be an end. Prince Qin Huang of the Great Xia, you have no regrets. In the battlefield, the martial monarch moved. He raised his halberd and lightning condensed. He wanted to end the legend of the Great Xia with one strike. Prince Qin Huang coughed out a mouthful of blood, but his expression was still as calm as before. With a move of his hand, the green and red swords flew over and his figure flashed. That day, before Ningchen went into seclusion, he said many things. Among them, the most important thing was the possible way to break the dual sea of qi. Senior, the martial monarch's dual sea of qi is strong because he can quickly recover his qi when attacking and defending. He doesn't need to rest. When defending, he can also fight while recovering his injuries. However, that doesn't mean there is no solution. Everything has its advantages and disadvantages. The martial monarch has an extra sea of qi. At the same time he has the advantage of using his true qi, it also means he has an extra fatal flaw. No matter how strong his innate recovery ability is, after his sea of qi is broken, he cannot recover in a short period of time. Moreover, martial monarchs have always been used to fighting with dual sea of qi. Once one of them is broken, the martial monarch's attacks will be greatly affected and more flaws will appear. However, if you want to break one of the martial monarch's sea of qi, you must first find the location of the second sea of qi. Since the location of the first sea of qi is known by everyone, the martial monarch's protection towards that sea of qi must be the tightest. In other words, since no one knows the location of the second sea of qi, the martial monarch's protection towards it will be relatively weaker. At this moment, even the ground began to freeze. The white world spread and turned into a world of ice crystals. Heaven and earth were frozen, and all living things seemed to be dead. In the silent world, all sound had disappeared, and there was only the sound of swords and people. In the next moment, lightning descended from the 9 heavens, breaking this silent scene. The sea of lightning surged like the cries of 1,000 birds as it rapidly disintegrated the world of ice and snow. The halberd was blocked by the green sword. The ground beneath their feet sank by 3 feet and collapsed once again. The martial monarch's tyrannical move was world-shocking. The azure sword violently trembled, as if it was emitting a mournful cry. Hearing the sword aura, Prince Yan's expression changed slightly. His body flashed and he retreated 10 feet away. This battle ends here. With a wave of his hand, the green sword returned to its stand. The sword stand disappeared and fell in front of "Aw man, let's go." Prince Yan's figure flickered as he arrived before them and said calmly. A man's eyes were wide open and filled with confusion. He didn't know what was going on. Within the battlefield, the martial monarch frowned, but he didn't stop them. A man foolishly carried the sword stand and left. Marquis Kaishian and the martial monarch had no choice but to give the order to retreat. "Senior, did you win?" asked a man curiously. "No." Prince Yan shook his head. "Ah, you lost." A man was a bit disappointed. "You also didn't lose." Prince Yan shook his head once more. "Then it was a draw?" asked the man with certainty this time. Prince Yan smiled. "Not really. The battle just didn't end." Oh. The man was first startled, but then he understood. If they didn't want to fight, then so be it. Not fighting was the right thing to do. The two of them stayed in the Blackwater Army's camp for a short while before leaving on the same day. Marquis Kaishian asked for the reason and then didn't stay any longer. He watched them leave. Although this battle hadn't ended, at the very least they had confirmed the location of their second Dantian Sea of Qi. They still had hope of defeating the martial monarchs in the future. "Senior, where are we going?" A man walked a few steps before being pulled down. He then ran a few steps to catch up. "The Confucian sect." Prince Yan walked in front. "Why are we going to the Confucian sect?" The man didn't know anything about the Confucian sect, but he still asked curiously. "To replenish my sword," said Prince Yan calmly. The martial monarch truly was very strong. Furthermore, he still had a trump card he hadn't used. He didn't know whether or not he could win, but he knew that if they continued fighting, the azure sword would definitely break. The two swords were a pair of swords. If one was broken, the other would quickly lose its spirituality. Every sword was very important in a battle. If he deliberately didn't use the azure sword, it was almost impossible to defeat the martial monarch. Fortunately, he had completed the task Ning Chen had entrusted him with. A day later, Ning Chen walked out of the underworld and headed to the northern battlefield. Ning Chen's appearance in Marquis Bloodrobe's camp startled Marquis Bloodrobe, who was reading a secret report from a spy. The figure in front of him was so familiar. Other than that slightly pale face that hadn't seen the sun for a long time, everything else about him was the same as before. Marquis, long time no see, greeted Ning Chen with a light smile. As expected, you're still alive. Marquis Bloodrobe came back to his senses and sighed. Hearing from others and seeing with one's own eyes were two different things. Now that he saw Ning Chen in person, he finally believed this fact. After a simple greeting, the two of them brought the topic to the battle between Northern Meng and Great Xia. As Ning Chen listened to Marquis Bloodrobe's narration, his expression became more and more serious. The situation was far more troublesome than he had imagined. Originally, he had thought that when the wheat valleys in the north ripened, they would be able to force the Northern Meng army to the southeast of Great Xia. In the future, they would be able to use the advantage of the terrain to slow down the Northern Meng army's southward advance. Who would have thought that Fan Lingyue would see through it and turn the tables on Great Xia? Now that Northern Meng had charged out of the encirclement, they were unstoppable and left Great Xia in a sorry state. Ning Chen took 2 steps forward. Looking at the map, he was silent for a long time. It was already the middle of the 7th month. It should have been the time of the year when the rain was the heaviest. However, there wasn't much rain in the north of Great Xia this year. This also made it easier for Northern Meng to invade the south. Even the heavens weren't on Great Xia's side. It wouldn't be easy for Great Xia to turn the situation around. How far are we from Northern Meng? Ning Chen asked. A day and a half. However, with just my troops, I won't be able to stop the Northern Meng army, Marquis Bloodrobe replied. No matter how strong the Imperial Guards were, they wouldn't be able to stop the Northern Meng cavalry on the plains. The difference in mobility was too great. Let's speed up. Reinforcements should be arriving soon, Ning Chen slowly said. On the western battlefield, regardless of the outcome of the battle between the senior and the martial monarchs would be heavily injured. Without the martial monarchs, the threat of the Divine Sect's army would be greatly reduced. With Marquis Kaixuan and the Blackwater army holding the fort, it would be enough to deter them. The reinforcements sent to the west could be changed to the north to reinforce the more urgent northern battlefield. Alright, I won't say any more goodbyes. Until we meet again. After Ning Chen left, Marquis Bloodrobe walked out of the tent. Looking at Ning Chen's gradually disappearing figure, he was silent. The favor that Grand Xia owed him could no longer be paid off. For the sake of Grand Xia, Jiming Marquis had given up his life, his emotions, his reputation, and everything else. Apart from the few people who knew the truth, the majority of Grand Xia's commoners viewed Jiming Marquis as an executioner and a symbol of evil. The commoners were ignorant, but they couldn't give up because of this. As marquises, they had to protect this country and its millions of commoners. There was no excuse. The glory of marquises was something that had been exchanged with the blood of their ancestors for 1,000 years. He, Marquis Triumphant returned, Marquis Jiming, and the other 7 marquises of this generation were walking down this path until death. In the 1,000 years of Great Xia's history, other than Xia Rui, all the Xia emperors could be said to be wise emperors. This was undoubtedly a miracle. Before Xia Rui experienced the upheaval, he was also a diligent ruler. Unfortunately, he became a tyrant because of his jealousy and paranoia. Xia Mingri had only ascended the throne for a short period of time. So far, he had shown a good temperament. However, there were many monarchs who could share weal and woe together but not share riches and honor. No one knew whether Xia Mingri was such a person or not. Ning Chen did not care about these things. Among the 4 princes of the Great Xia dynasty, apart from Xia Zi, the most talented one was actually the 3rd prince. However, talent did not necessarily mean that he was suitable for the position of Emperor Xia. Xia Yanwu was too confident. He was like Xia Rui in the past, always thinking that everything was in his hands. The only difference was that Xia Yanwu was stronger. Therefore, in the face of Fan Lingyue's solicitation, he would agree without hesitation. Xia Mingri was the exact opposite. Compared to the third prince, Xia Mingri was more patient and cautious. Of course, he was forced by the situation at that time and had no choice. In the past, Xia Yanwu might have been a better candidate for Emperor Xia. However, now that the world was in chaos and Fan Lingyue was still alive, Xia Yanwu's arrogance would be a disaster for Great Xia. In the Heavenly Mandate Palace, Ningchen and Xia Mingri talked for a long time. The guards and eunuchs in front of the palace had all left. No one knew what they talked about. 4 hours later, Ningchen left and went straight north. The ghost sedan drove for 700 miles. At the same time, a beautiful figure flashed past. Her clothes were whiter than snow. There was no trace of emotion on her perfect face. She was like a fairy from the 9 heavens. She was so extraordinary that no one dared to look at her directly. Mu Qingxue. After Ningchen felt a familiar aura in front of him, he stopped the ghost sedan and made way. If this was just a chance encounter, he would pretend that he did not know. He was waiting for her to leave. Unfortunately, Mu Qingxue also stopped. Their eyes met. They looked through the curtains of the ghost sedan. The person who had once protected him had now become the most familiar stranger. Her indifferent eyes still did not have the slightest ripple. The scabbed wound in Ning Chen's heart was torn open again. Besides pain, there was only pain. "Miss, please make way." Ning Chen endured the pain in his heart and said, "Return the scroll of life and I will let you live." Mu Qingxue said lightly. "Impossible." Ning Chen refused without hesitation. He could give up the scroll of earth and the scroll of heaven. Only the scroll of life was absolutely impossible. If he returned it, then there would be nothing between them. After getting a negative answer, Mu Qingxue moved. He unsheathed the Qingying sword and turned into the fastest shadow in the world. In a flash, he was in front of the sedan. The 3-meter-long ghost sedan became the cruelest battlefield. The sword was merciless. The ink sword came out and blocked the Qingying sword with a clang. The two swords collided. The aftershock spread and the ghost sedan immediately scattered. Ning Chen retreated 3 steps, slightly at a disadvantage. Peak 9th grade. Mu Qingxue's eyes flashed with a strange light. The first time they met in Desolate City, the person in front of him was only a 6th grade Hotian realm cultivator. He didn't expect that in just half a year, he would reach the peak of the Heavens Reach realm. "Miss, please make way." Ning Chen's expression was complicated. There was no reply. Only the sword light was like lightning. It was a person who had forgotten the past. The sword light was cold, emotionless. Ning Chen sighed and no longer said anything. The ink sword condensed into frost, the wind and snow opening the path to heaven. The exchange of swords was fast. Mu Qingxue's speed was unparalleled under the heavens. He was so fast that even his afterimages could not be seen. The ink sword in Ning Chen's hand was 90% offensive and 10% defensive. Apart from the sword light piercing towards his dantian, it did not care about anything else. Mu Qingxue's expression became even colder. His figure flashed and he appeared in the air. The Qingying sword rapidly spun and the mist in the sky condensed into sword qi, forming a beautiful pair of snow-white wings behind him. Sword leaving scars. In the blink of an eye, the beautiful figure in the air disappeared. The sword had left a scar and pierced through her body. Ugh! Ning Chen let out a muffled groan. Ignoring the pain in his chest, he grabbed the Qingying sword and slashed down. Mu Qingxue's figure rapidly retreated until he was 30 meters away. Looking at Ning Chen, his eyes narrowed. Undying body. You can't kill me. Ning Chen pulled out the Qingying sword from his chest. As he spoke, black blood dripped down from his chest and onto the ground. The vegetation around him quickly withered, losing all vitality. The Qingying sword trembled, resisting the blood on the sword, unwilling to yield. Ning Chen sighed inwardly. His left hand shook, dispersing the blood on the sword. Then he waved his hand and returned the sword. Mu Qingxue received the Qingying sword and frowned. For a moment, he hesitated. "Miss, if you want to take back the life-returning scroll, there's no need to rush. I consumed the Yellow Springs flower and won't be able to live for long. Desolate City has already waited for over 1,000 years. A few more months won't matter," said Ning Chen softly. "You know who I am." A cold light flashed through Mu Qingxue's eyes. "I was once the head of the Grand Court for a period of time. I was always able to find out things that ordinary people don't know. Miss, your surname is Mu, and the Xin Empire's imperial family is also surnamed Mu. More importantly, after the Xin Empire was destroyed, no one knew the whereabouts of the life-returning scroll. The Grand Xia searched for 1,000 years but still couldn't find it." Ning Chen raised his head and stared into Mu Qingxue's eyes. "If I'm not wrong, Miss, and that senior in Desolate City should be the descendants of the Xin Empire's imperial family." Hearing that, killing intent rose in Mu Qingxue's eyes. His figure flashed and he instantly appeared in front of Ning Chen. Ning Chen let go of the sword between his fingers and took a few steps back. He said, "Miss, I'll say it again. You can't kill me. Besides, I'm not the only one who suspects or even knows about this matter. There's really no need to kill me to silence me." "What are you trying to say?" asked Mu Qingxue coldly. Ning Chen thought for a moment and said, "I want to make a deal with you." "What deal?" asked Mu Qingxue. "It's very simple. A life for a life. As long as you stay by my side, in the future, if there's a crisis, I hope you can help me once. In return, when the Yellow Springs poison flares up in a few months, you can kill me as easily as blowing off dust and take away the life scroll," suggested Ning Chen. Mu Qingxue didn't say anything. "Plus the Earth-returning scroll." Ning Chen released the aura of the Earth-returning scroll. Mu Qingxue was tempted and hesitated. "And the Heaven-returning scroll." Ning Chen continued to tempt him. "Deal." Mu Qingxue nodded and made a prompt decision. After the deal, Ning Chen's expression didn't change. He waved his hand to gather the ghost palanquin again and continued north. "Where did you get so many heavenly tomes?" Mu Qingxue asked the first question in his heart. Desolate City had only obtained one heaven-returning scroll in 1,000 years. And in this world, it was already difficult to obtain one heaven-returning scroll. Who would have thought that this young man would have 3? Ning Chen honestly said, "The life-returning scroll was given to me by you, the earth-returning scroll was picked up by me, and the heaven-returning scroll was stolen from a tomb." Mu Qingxue frowned and said, "I don't know you." "We used to know each other, but you forgot," said Ning Chen slowly. Mu Qingxue closed his eyes, unwilling to speak. The corner of Ning Chen's mouth curled up into an almost undetectable smile. Being able to keep her by his side for these next few months was also good. If the poison really flared up in a few months, these 3 heavenly tomes would be useless to him. He might as well give them to her. He wanted to thank his senior for giving him 6 or 7 months of sober time. He wanted to live a long life, and he wanted to see Mu Qingxue while he was still alive. That was enough, truly enough. Chapter 178. In the northern Meng camp, an urgent secret letter was sent to the commander's tent. After reading it, Fan Lingyue's expression changed slightly. King Yen went west to challenge Martial Lord. Martial Lord was seriously injured, and the Divine Sect's heavy cavalry retreated 200 miles and did not come out. Fan Lingyue got up and came to the army's marching map. After carefully considering for a long time, just as he was about to give an order, he saw a familiar figure walk in. "It's you. Long time no see." Looking at each other, the coldest killing intent was aroused. Fan Lingyue looked at the figure in front of him. After a short moment of surprise, he stretched out his slender hand, pressing forward. Ning Chen moved his feet, his sword fingers condensing frost, and similarly met the attack. There was no conversation, no hypocrisy, only cold killing intent. The two moves collided, and the aftermath spread out. The commander's tent could not withstand the scattered sword power and was torn apart. Neither of them showed mercy. Today was different from the past. With the opponent dead, this battle had no more variables. The chill on the sword fingers was bone-chilling, and the white light on the slender hand was even more ruthless. In the instant of the collision, the killing intent was brilliant. The big movement in the commander's tent attracted the attention of several generals in the army who were closest, and they quickly rushed over. Under the night sky in the distance, Mu Qingxue watched the battle without the slightest intention of going forward to help. Among the 7 generals who rushed over, 4 of them were above the 9th rank. Without saying anything, they immediately joined the battle. Ning Chen blocked 5 by himself, the cold light on his hand becoming sharper and sharper. Proud of his courage, he did not fall into a disadvantage. The silver light on his sword fingers was extremely bright. Among the 5, Fan Lingyue was the strongest, blocking most of the attacks. The other 4 supported with all their strength, cooperating well. For a time, they were in a stalemate. The movement of the battle was getting bigger and bigger. After the arrival of the 7 generals, another 9th rank late-stage expert came to join the battle. 6 against 1, they killed the intruder. Facing 6 people, Ning Chen used his full strength for the first time. His sword moved without end, and sword chi wrapped around his fingers, blocking the 6 people's attacks. The fierce battle of the powerful Heaven's Reach realm made the surrounding soldiers below the 9th rank not dare to take half a step closer, for fear of being involved and dying in vain. The battle became more and more intense, and the situation became more and more stalemate. Ning Chen's mind was highly focused, but there was always an indescribable sense of inconsistency. Fan Lingyue's performance was strong enough, but it was still not enough. At the same time, Fan Lingyue also followed. A white light rose from her slender hand, extremely dazzling. Ning Chen flipped his left palm, and his palm met Fan Lingyue's. Immediately, he felt his true chi drain away, and he had no more strength left. A strange technique appeared once again. Ning Chen immediately retracted his true chi and retreated 10 feet. "Go!" Fan Lingyue coldly said. Qing Wuyo did not dare to delay and quickly left. "Do you think you can leave?" Ning Chen coldly snorted and took out the Deathbreaker bow. In the bright silver light, 3 arrows pierced through the air. The 3 terrifying arrows chased after the stars and the moon, surpassing the limits of space. In the blink of an eye, they arrived in front of Qing Wuyo. In the next moment, blood splattered everywhere. Qing Wuyo blocked the first 2 arrows, but he could not block the third. In an instant, he was heavily injured. "You're the one courting death." Seeing her subordinates injured one after another, anger flashed through Fan Lingyue's eyes. Her black hair danced, and the white light around her flourished. She raised her technique to the peak. Ning Chen did not dare to be careless. Facing an opponent who had finally used her full strength, he raised his hand and pointed, and the sword reflected the 9 heavens and the moon. 10,000-li raging waves split, 10,000-li raging waves surged and roared. In the rolling waves, a sword split the sky and slashed down with a loud bang. Fan Lingyue was not afraid at all. He raised the raging waves with a single palm. In the brilliant white light, the sword intent of split the sky turned invisible and disappeared. The moment Ning Chen recovered his chi, Fan Lingyue's figure flashed. He flipped his palm and black blood dyed the sky. Just like the first time they fought, this was an unbelievably strong opponent. Blood dripped from the corner of Ning Chen's mouth. His expression was grave. He did not believe that there was an absolutely invincible technique in this world. Even the undying body had flaws, let alone a technique that was cultivated after birth. Fury of the 9 heavens. In order to test the limits of Fan Lingyue's technique, Ning Chen once again activated his true qi. With a flip of his palm, blue waves covered the sky and earth. A divine waterfall fell from the sky with a loud bang. Stupid! Fan Lingyue stretched out his right hand. The fury of the 9 heavens dissipated. In the next moment, a vast palm pressed down and blood splattered 3 feet away. The angry Fan Lingyue was like a goddess of war from the heavens. Divine light covered her body and her pair of white hands were invincible. She was so powerful that she was invincible. The northern Meng soldiers in the distance were shocked to see the military advisor who had always been known for his wisdom display such a terrifying strength. Chapter 179. The night wind blew and her blue dress danced in the wind. Fan Lingyue held the hilt of the Jingye Absolute Beginning sword and slowly pulled it out. Seeing that the unknown ancient sword was about to be unsheathed, Ning Chen's feet moved and he instantly closed in. The black sword pierced forward, threatening to kill. Clang! With a vibration, Fan Lingyue turned her hand and condensed her qi. White light gathered and blocked the black sword. The Absolute Beginning sword was unsheathed and appeared for the first time in 1,000 years. Immediately, endless sword might spread and sent the figure in front flying. After 10 feet, Ning Chen landed on the ground and stopped in a sorry state. He looked at the ancient sword in Fan Lingyue's hand with a serious expression. This sword had been nurtured for an unknown number of years. The sword intent hidden inside was truly shocking. However, the most terrifying thing was the power of the sword itself. Even he, who had an undying body, felt a bone-chilling coldness. Tonight, knowing your destiny but not your destiny, returning to the Yellow Springs. With the sword in her hand, Fan Lingyue's entire temperament changed. The wise and calm military advisor disappeared and was replaced by a death god full of killing intent. White light protected her entire body and nothing could break it. With the Jingye Absolute Beginning in her hand, there was nothing she couldn't overcome. Facing the strongest opponent in his life, Ning Chen's expression was unprecedentedly serious. He took a step forward and the cold snow around him surged. In that instant, the swords crossed each other. One was strong, and the other was even stronger. Under this bloody night sky, another martial art was unleashed. At this moment, the military advisor of Bei Meng displayed not only the wisdom of the world, but also the strength that shocked the world. Ning Chen fought bitterly and the injuries on his body became more and more serious. His undying body actually showed signs of collapsing. In the distant night sky, the light in Mu Qingshue's eyes kept jumping. No one knew the origin of the Jingye Absolute Beginning. However, this sword could purify some negative karma and inauspiciousness. It had a strong restraining effect on Ning Chen's fake undying body. More and more blood flowed from the corner of Fan Lingyue's mouth. Forcefully exerting all of her strength undoubtedly put a huge burden on her body. Specks of blood floated on her blue dress, like scarlet flowers blooming in the blue sky. This was a stalemate. Apart from the two of them, no one knew whether Fan Lingyue's body couldn't take it or Ning Chen's undying body collapsed first. The two of them had already unleashed their strength to the peak. Sword qi danced in the air, forming a vacuum that no one dared to approach. There was no doubt about Ning Chen's strength. If it wasn't for Lingyue, he could definitely be called the strongest person below the innate stage. However, Fan Lingyue's strength had already far exceeded the limits of the Heaven's Reach realm, powerful to the point of being hard to believe. Absolute suppression, there was no chance. Facing the Absolute Beginning and the pure white body protecting divine light, the faster Ning Chen's sword was, the faster his true power would be consumed, and the more injuries he would have. He couldn't break through the protective divine light and couldn't defend against Jingye Taichu. In the past, even when Ning Chen faced the Buddha in the mortal world, he wasn't in such a sorry state. The night was getting darker, and the bright moon was moving westward. More and more people were watching the battle. Si Ming Jian had been standing there for a long time, waiting for the moment to attack. Suddenly, the ink sword flashed past and broke through the white light for the first time. Fan Lingyue's left shoulder was injured and he took 3 steps back. This sudden change not only stunned the surrounding northern Meng soldiers, but also Ning Chen himself. He didn't know what was going on. In the next moment, Ning Chen came back to his senses. The black sword condensed into frost and went in another inch. Stand down. Fan Lingyue endured the pain in his left shoulder and forcefully raised his martial arts, pushing the former away with a palm. Ning Chen flew a dozen steps back and stabilized his body. He condensed his martial arts, and as the frost surged, his sword swept out and once again stabbed towards the flaw and the protective divine light. Foolish beyond compare. Fan Lingyue sneered, and the white light around his body shone brightly. The moment the ink sword was about to reach him, his delicate hand condensed qi and blocked the front. The swift and fierce sword actually couldn't move an inch. Ning Chen was stunned. In that short moment, Jingye Taichu flashed past and blood spurted out. How can this be? Ning Chen staggered and retreated 7 or 8 steps. He vomited blood, and his face was full of disbelief. Are you surprised? Fan Lingyue walked over step by step and said coldly, you only have 1 chance of good luck. Unfortunately, you didn't grab it. Why? Ning Chen supported himself with his sword and said with difficulty. He was very sure that the position just now was the flaw in the protective divine light. Why did it disappear for no reason? Someone will tell you in the netherworld. Fan Lingyue stopped, and the white light of Jingye Taichu in his hand flourished as he slashed down. At this moment, the 4 marked swords that had been waiting for an opportunity also condensed qi and rushed over. At the critical moment, Ning Chen forcefully raised his body and pushed the life scroll to its peak. The first snow fell from the sky and danced in the wind. Emotions when it's almost snowing, snow in July drifts. In the blink of an eye, sword light bloomed in the wind and snow. Every snowflake carried an extremely swift and fierce sword intent. It was unavoidable and unblockable. The 4 marked swords in front of Fang Zhi were affected by the wind and snow and were immediately dyed with blood. Fan Lingyue's expression changed slightly. He waved his hand and white light filled the sky, scattering the incoming snowflakes. In that short moment, Ning Chen's feet moved and he quickly retreated. Fan Lingyue was about to give chase when he suddenly staggered and vomited a mouthful of blood. The illness that he had suppressed for a long time erupted, and he could no longer suppress it. In the ghost palanquin, Ning Chen also vomited a mouthful of blood, his face pale. What a good Fan Lingyue! He was really invincible. What a miserable defeat! Mu Qingxue said indifferently. Ha! Ning Chen closed his eyes tiredly. He had nothing to say about his defeat. He was completely suppressed and had no power to fight back. Did you find an opening? Mu Qingxue asked. No. Ning Chen shook his head and said hoarsely, I originally found it, but it disappeared for some reason. Let me tell you something you don't know. Fan Lingyue has a chaos volume. Mu Qingxue thought for a moment and reminded him. Chaos volume. Ning Chen opened his eyes and a light flashed through them. Perhaps the problem with the chaos volume in the heavenly book came from this. Fan Lingyue was able to perfectly conceal his martial aura before. That should be the effect of the chaos volume. As for whether or not the strange scene today was due to the chaos volume, he wasn't too sure. That terrifying white light was both offensive and defensive. If one couldn't find an opening, it was practically an invincible battle technique. Ugh! Suddenly, Ning Chen let out a pained groan. The evil aura around his body surged, and the underworld spring in his dantian released a powerful evil aura that quickly spread. After a long battle and being exhausted, the underworld spring erupted, wanting to devour his entire dantian. The situation that Prince Yen had spoken of had finally appeared, but it came at such an inopportune time. Mu Qingxue frowned and waited for Ning Chen to speak. Once this life-saving opportunity was used up, she would have fulfilled her promise. Ning Chen endured the pain in his dantian and took out 2 golden pills. In an instant, Buddhist light dazzled and Buddhist chanting could be faintly heard. Heavenly Buddha pill? Mu Qingxue narrowed his eyes. Ning Chen didn't use this life-saving opportunity. Instead, he swallowed the 2 pills and forcibly expelled the evil aura from his body. Buddhism and Buddhism were natural opposites. The evil aura and Buddhist energy violently collided within his body. The evil aura of the underworld spring was abnormally powerful. Although it was less than 1/10 of its original power, it won in terms of purity. The 2 heavenly Buddha pills were released at the same time, barely managing to resist the underworld spring's power. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ning Chen forcefully circulated the remaining true qi in his body. The power of the 3 heavenly books and the Zhangsun bloodline's true qi erupted at the same time, forcing out the underworld spring. You really have a lot of things in your body, said Mu Qingxue calmly as he glanced at the overbearing underworld spring. In order to live, I have to try many things. Ning Chen waved his hand and put away the underworld spring. He smiled tiredly. Was the ghost girl reliable or not? She didn't tell him that the underworld spring would have side effects. Fortunately, he could still distinguish between those who wanted to help him and those who wanted to harm him. Otherwise, he would have definitely gone over and destroyed the stone room she was in. When the ghost palanquin returned to the underworld, it was already close to daybreak. Mu Qingxue looked at this strange place and walked around. So this was the legendary underworld. A few months wasn't a long time for a Xiantian. She would wait for him for a few months to take back the life scroll that belonged to Desolate City. As for the Earth and Heaven scrolls, they could be considered as interest. Northern Meng's camp was a mess after the battle. The place where the 2 had fought was now a wasteland. The only thing that could still be seen were the terrifying sword scars. Fan Lingyue sheathed his sword and his powerful aura disappeared. Enduring his injuries, he ordered, Wu Shuiyan, Yuan General Bai Li immediately take 40,000 light cavalry to stop Marquis Blood-Robe's army. Yes. The 2 generals accepted the order and quickly left. In Shaoyuan, Yuan Fei, Kong Ping, informed the army to immediately set off at daybreak, continued Fan Lingyue. Yes. Another 3 generals walked out and accepted the order. The rest of you, go back and prepare yourselves, said Fan Lingyue. Yes. The remaining 5 generals bowed respectfully and quickly returned to the camp. PFFF, after everyone left, Fan Lingyue once again spat out a mouthful of blood. He staggered and almost fell down. When they met again, he was even stronger than before. Now in Northern Meng's camp, except for her, no one was his opponent. In just a short year, the young man of the past had become a big threat today. In the netherworld underworld, Ning Chen's expression was also abnormally grave. He had already tried his best to delay, but he didn't know if Marquis Blood-Robed could grasp the opportunity. Fan Lingyue's strength was beyond expectations. In addition to the white light protecting his body, there was also the Moon Scroll's move. Every Heavenly Scroll's move had to be at the Xiantian level to cultivate. The Earth Scroll was like this, the Heaven Scroll was like this, and the Moon Scroll was no exception. However, Fan Lingyue's cultivation was undoubtedly still below the Xiantian level. At this time, there was no longer any need to hide. If Fan Lingyue was at the Xiantian level, he wouldn't have been able to return tonight. The Heavenly Scroll's move was truly terrifying. At that moment, he couldn't move or resist. He was completely waiting for death. If not for his immortal body, that palm would have already killed him. However, there was one thing he could be sure of. Fan Lingyue could only use the Moon Scroll's move once in a short period of time. Otherwise, with the addition of the pure beginning that Mu Qingxue spoke of, even if he had an immortal body, he would still be deader than dead. Ning Chen closed his eyes and stood in the netherworld underworld in contemplation. He couldn't find a flaw. It was truly a battle that made people despair. He still couldn't understand why the flaw in the white light had disappeared. Also, what other use did the Chaos Scroll have besides hiding one's aura? Also, was the disappearance of the flaw related to the Chaos Scroll? In the distance, Mu Qingxue looked at the silent figure in front of him. His eyes flashed. Did she really know him in the past? Chapter 180. In the Netherworld Kingdom, Ghost Woman's seclusion room was emitting ghost chi that was growing stronger by the day. It could be seen that Ghost Woman was not far from the Xiantian realm and could step into it at any time. If nothing unexpected happened, Ghost Woman would be the next person to step into the Xiantian realm. Originally, this person should have been Xia Zi. Unfortunately, he was shot down from the Xiantian realm by Ning Chen's arrow that night. In this world, there were countless geniuses, but there were still a few special people who looked down on the world, far surpassing them. Underworld Child, Ghost Woman, Xia Zi, God's Child, etc. The Netherworld Kingdom had been in decline for a long time. In this generation, only Underworld Child and Ghost Woman were still awake. Underworld Child was an anomaly in the Netherworld Kingdom. His temperament was hard to predict, so the only true successor of the Netherworld Kingdom was Ghost Woman. The ghost chi in the stone room continued to spread. Under the red veil, Ghost Woman's mouth was bleeding. The more anxious she was to break through to the Xiantian realm, the more difficult it was for her to take that crucial step. Within the Netherworld Kingdom, Mu Qingxue felt the powerful ghost chi. His figure flashed and he arrived outside the stone room. Just as he was about to approach, he saw the Zhiga sword move and sword intent spread out. Mu Qingxue's expression turned cold. He immediately retreated 30 meters and unsheathed the Chengying sword, blocking the sword intent. The Zhiga sword blocked and protected the stone room behind the sword. Even a Xiantian expert would find it difficult to take half a step forward. Mu Qingxue narrowed his eyes and turned to leave. At the entrance of the Netherworld Kingdom, Ning Chen stood quietly. Seeing Mu Qingxue walk over, he smiled and said, "What's wrong? Are you not used to it?" "The person in the stone room is in danger," Mu Qingxue said calmly. Ning Chen turned around with a surprised expression. Just as he was about to speak, he felt the chaotic aura in the depths of the Netherworld Kingdom. His expression changed and he quickly disappeared. Mu Qingxue thought for a moment and followed him. Ning Chen appeared in front of the stone room. He didn't dare to delay and immediately pushed open the door and charged in. The Zhiga sword was calm and didn't have any reaction. Mu Qingxue's eyes flashed. He tried to take a step forward, but he felt the sword intent appear again. It was as heavy as a mountain, difficult to approach. The Great Xia Kingdom's legend. Mu Qingxue looked at the sword in front of the stone room and praised in his heart. When Prince Yan and Ning Chen went to Desolation City together, they used this sword. Now, it seemed that Prince Yan's true strength was not inferior to any three disaster realm expert. Inside the stone chamber, Ghost Girl's blood chi was surging. The chaotic aura spread out and filled the entire stone chamber. Ning Chen rushed in and activated the life scroll. His sword finger condensed into frost and pointed at the Ghost Girl's chi si. His vast aura poured into the Ghost Girl's chi si, suppressing the surging Jin chi in her body. Outside the stone room, Mu Qingxue waved his hand. The shadow-bearing sword was unsheathed. Holding it in his slender hand, he rushed forward. Clang! The Zhiga sword moved, and the sword intent spread out. The Chengying sword was only 3 feet away when it was shaken out. Mu Qingxue was not affected at all. He took a step in the air, turned around, and slashed out with his sword. With a king sound, the two swords clashed for the first time. The Zhiga sword hummed softly, its sword intent flourishing, completely erupting. Bang! Mu Qingxue flew out. After landing on the ground, his figure flickered a few times before he charged forward again. His white robe fluttered, and he was as fast as a flash of light. With one sword strike, he disappeared immediately. When he reappeared, the sword light had yet to fall, and he was gone again. The Zhiga sword was as immovable as a mountain. Its sword intent spread out in circles, blocking the intruder. At the same time, inside the stone chamber, Ning Chen activated the life scroll with all his might. Amidst the wind and snow, all of his power was poured into the ghost girl's body. Ah! The ghost girl let out a long painful groan. Her red wedding dress shook. Suddenly, the red veil flew up, revealing a seductive face. In that instant, the ghost girl opened her eyes. Her eyes were filled with panic. She subconsciously sent out a palm strike, and with a bang, the person in front of her was shaken out. Ning Chen did not react in time. Without any preparation, he flew out of the stone chamber and landed on the ground. He vomited a mouthful of blood. The stone chamber closed. The ghost girl came back to her senses for a moment, and then closed her consciousness again. Cough cough, Ning Chen's qi was severely depleted. His qi was exhausted, and he was hit by the ghost girl's full-power palm strike. For a moment, even standing up was difficult for him. Mu Qingxue stopped. Looking at Ning Chen in front of him, he frowned. He reached out to pick him up and left. If I killed you right now, wouldn't it be as easy as blowing off dust? Mu Qingxue indifferently asked. Taking advantage of someone's perilous state is not the conduct of a gentleman. Ning Chen coughed up a mouthful of blood. Talking about a gentleman's conduct with a woman is incomparably stupid. Mu Qingxue sneered. Ning Chen was startled. He felt that this sentence was somewhat familiar, as if someone had said something like this in the past. If you kill me right now, you won't be able to obtain the earth and heaven scrolls. It's not appropriate. Mu Qingxue thoughtfully nodded. That makes sense. Ning Chen tiredly smiled. Mu Qingxue only felt the Qingying sword in his hands sink, and before he could react, he was once again sent flying by the sword intent. Why don't you listen to me first? Anyways, there are still a few months, and you have plenty of time to compete with this sword. Ning Chen seriously suggested. Mu Qingxue sheathed his sword and said expressionlessly, "Speak. If you act, how confident are you in killing Fan Lingyue?" Ning Chen asked curiously. Mu Qingxue looked at the former with a weird expression, and a look of disdain flashed across his eyes. 50%. However, if this is your request, I advise you to give up. I only promised to save you once, and I did not promise to help you kill someone. Kiki, I'm just asking out of curiosity. Ning Chen rubbed his nose and laughed. A 50% chance was not high. Ning Chen's mind spun, and he temporarily suppressed this thought. If even Mu Qingxue only had a 50% chance, then that meant that as long as it was not a 3-disaster expert, no one would have the confidence to kill Fan Lingyue. This war had already reached the most crucial moment, and if he could kill Fan Lingyue, that would be the best solution. However, he could not place all his hopes on that. At this moment, he had to think of a way to prevent the northern Meng forces from gathering outside Yangguan City. If Jingwu Duke could arrive in time, Great Xia could still fight this war.